Well, I worked Houston. I worked Corpus Christi. Every little town here. Longview, man. You name it. I've been there. You know, really. I've been all over Texas.
Elvis Presley sang songs he hated. That is not an opinion or a reinterpretation. It is a documented, repeatedly confirmed fact that the people who work closest to him have spoken about openly in the decades since his death. He sang movie soundtrack filler that he privately described with a contempt so sharp it could cut glass. He sang novelty tracks handed to him by producers who understood the commercial moment better than they understood the artist. He sang Vegas arrangements that took the raw, revolutionary sound that had changed American music and dressed it up in orchestral excess until it was barely recognizable. He sang all of it, with commitment, with professionalism, with a kind of vocal generosity that made even the songs he despised sound like they mattered, because when Elvis Presley opened his mouth, everything sounded like it mattered. That is what made him Elvis, not just the voice itself, though the voice was extraordinary, a once-in-a-generation instrument that could move between tenderness and ferocity with a naturalness that no amount of training could manufacture. What made him Elvis was the willingness to give everything to whatever was in front of him, regardless of whether he believed in it, regardless of whether it served his artistic legacy, regardless of whether it was worthy of what he was pouring into it. He was, in the truest and most exhausting sense of the word, a performer. Music was the one place where withholding was not in his vocabulary, which is exactly why the refusal stops you cold. Because somewhere inside the enormous catalog of everything Elvis Presley sang, the gospel, the rock and roll, the country, the soul, the pop ballads, the hymns recorded at midnight in sessions that his producers described as unlike anything else they had ever witnessed, there is a gap, a single, specific, deliberate gap. One song that he recorded and then would not perform. One song that every time it was suggested, every time someone in his circle thought they were making an obvious and emotionally resonant recommendation, produced a response that was not anger, not negotiation, not the kind of artistic temperament that public mythology sometimes attached to his name. It produced stillness, a particular kind of stillness that the people who witnessed it recognized immediately as something categorically different from a preference or a scheduling decision or a contractual consideration. This was not Elvis declining a song because he didn't like the arrangement, or because the key didn't suit him, or because the material felt beneath his talent. This was Elvis encountering a boundary inside himself that he had not constructed deliberately, but that was nonetheless immovable. The people in those rooms, the musicians, the producers, the members of his inner circle who had seen him navigate every conceivable emotional terrain that a career like his could generate, knew the difference. And they knew, without needing it explained, that this particular subject was closed. What the song actually was, and why it held that power over a man who seemed to fear very little when it came to music, that requires context. It requires understanding something about Elvis Presley that the mythology consistently obscures, which is that beneath the performance, beneath the icon, beneath the cultural phenomenon that his name became almost immediately and remained long after his death, there was a private interior life that was shaped almost entirely by a single loss. Everything else, the fame, the excess, the marriages and divorces, the creative peaks and the commercial compromises, orbited that loss the way planets orbit a sun. You cannot understand the refusal without understanding what was at the center of it. And we will get there. But first, stay with the refusal itself for a moment longer, because it deserves that. The accounts of what these moments looked like are consistent across multiple sources who had no reason to coordinate their descriptions. A suggestion would be made, casually, professionally, with a genuine belief that the song would connect with audiences in a way that would be meaningful. Elvis would hear it. And then, something would shift in him that the people present struggled to find adequate language for. One musician who worked with him described it as watching a door close behind someone's eyes. A producer who witnessed it more than once said that the room temperature seemed to change, that there was a quality to the silence Elvis produced in those moments that made everyone around him instinctively understand that the conversation was over. Not because he commanded it to be over, because some things are simply over, and the people sensitive enough to recognize that know better than to push. He never explained it publicly. He never gave an interview in which he addressed the refusal directly or offered the world a tidy emotional narrative about why that particular song represented a line he would not cross. That was not how Elvis communicated the things that mattered most to him. The things that mattered most to him, he kept in a place that performances could approach but never fully enter. Most of the time. With most songs. Not with this one. The question that sits at the center of all of this is deceptively simple, and it is the question that everyone who witnessed those refusal moments walked away carrying. What could a song possibly contain? What combination of words and melody and emotional architecture that could stop Elvis Presley, a man who had sung through every devastation his life had produced, completely and permanently in his tracks? The people who were in the room when it happened all said the same thing afterward. They said Elvis didn't get angry. He didn't make excuses. He just went somewhere else behind his eyes. And when he came back, the subject was closed. Permanently. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. Before we can name the song, we have to name the loss. Not because this is a biography looking for a chronological anchor, but because without understanding what Elvis lost on August 14, 1958, the refusal makes no sense. With it, the refusal makes complete and total and heartbreaking sense. It becomes not a mystery, but an inevitability, the only logical response of a man built the way Elvis was built, loving the way Elvis loved, losing the way Elvis lost. Love Presley died of a heart attack at the age of 46. Elvis was 23. He was more than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed. And that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. Nothing like the jumpsuits and the gospel records and the Hollywood smile. The picture looks like a man living two lives simultaneously. One life for the cameras, one life for the government. And the terrifying thing, the detail that should make every Elvis fan stop and reconsider everything, is how good he was at keeping them separate. He was already the most famous musician on the planet, already a cultural force so unprecedented that the English language was still in the process of developing adequate vocabulary to describe what he represented. He was weeks away from being drafted into the United States Army, a fact that had generated more national media attention than most actual military operations. The world was watching Elvis Presley with an intensity that had no real precedent in modern entertainment history, and none of it mattered. Not one single inch of it. Because the woman who had looked at him, not at the performer, not at the phenomenon, not at the gold records and the movie contracts and the screaming crowds, but at him, the boy from Tupelo, who had been born into poverty so complete that his family had lost their house before he was old. Enough to understand what a mortgage was, the boy whose twin brother had died at birth and left him an only child with a mother whose love consequently carried the weight of what should have been divided between two. That woman was gone. And Elvis Presley, for all the fame and money and power that surrounded him on every side, could not get her back. The bond between Elvis and Gladys has been written about extensively, analyzed by biographers, and occasionally reduced by less careful observers to something vaguely pathological: the too close relationship between a Southern mother and her surviving son, strange in its intensity, unhealthy in its mutual dependency. That reading is both reductive and wrong. What existed between Elvis and Gladys was something more specific and more human than any clinical framework comfortably contains. It was the love of two people who had been genuinely poor together, who had understood deprivation not as an abstraction, but as a daily physical reality, and who had watched everything change with a speed so disorienting that the only stable point of reference either of them had was each other. Gladys had believed in Elvis before believing in Elvis was a rational position to hold. When he was a child with no particular evidence of future greatness, beyond his own burning conviction that he was meant for something, she believed him. When the world began to confirm that conviction in ways neither of them could have fully imagined, she remained the one person in his life whose belief in him had never been contingent on his success. Everyone else who came to love Elvis Presley loved him after the proof was in. Gladys loved him before. That distinction meant everything to him, and he knew it, and he never stopped knowing it for a single day of his life after she was gone. What accompanied the grief, and what the people closest to Elvis have consistently described as perhaps the most corrosive element of his loss, was the guilt. It was not a rational guilt. It was not based on anything Elvis had actually done wrong, but grief, particularly the grief of the young, rarely operates within the boundaries of rationality. Elvis had watched his mother struggle with the dislocation of fame, watched her transplanted from the familiar rhythms of Tupelo and Memphis into the vertiginous unreality of being the mother of the most famous person in the world, a role that came with no preparation and no protection and no instruction manual. He had watched her health deteriorate during the years of his greatest commercial success, and he had arrived at a conclusion that no amount of logic could fully dislodge: that the life he had built, the career that had made everything possible, had also made something impossible, had accelerated an ending that might, in a quieter life, have come later. He carried that. Not occasionally, not in the abstract way that people carry old sorrows that have softened with time. He carried it structurally, the way a building carries its foundation, invisibly, constantly, as the condition of everything else that stood on top of it. The people who knew Elvis well in the years after 1958 have described, with a consistency that is itself revealing, a man who had built an elaborate and exhausting architecture around that grief, specifically designed to ensure he never had to confront it directly. The relentless activity. The entourage that guaranteed he was never alone with his own thoughts. The excess that occupied every available moment of quiet before the quiet could turn dangerous. Music was different, though. Music had always been the one place where Elvis couldn't fully hide, even from himself. It was the medium through which his emotional life moved most honestly, most completely, most without the mediation of the performance mask. He could lose himself in a song in a way that was, paradoxically, the most found he ever was, which made certain songs extraordinarily powerful, and one song unbearable. He told someone close to him, years after Gladys died, that he could feel her in certain music, that there were songs where the distance between the living and the dead became thin enough to feel dangerous. Most of those songs he could navigate. He could feel the danger and sing through it anyway, because singing through things was what he did. But one song made the distance disappear entirely. And when the distance disappeared, there was nothing left to sing through. There was only the loss, raw, unchanged, exactly as he had left it on August 14th, 1958. And that was something Elvis Presley could not put on a stage. The song is called Mama Like the Roses. If you know it, you already understand everything that is about to be said. If you don't, take a moment before we go further and simply sit with the title. Not the melody, not the lyrics, just the title. Because in 4 words, it does something that most songs spend an entire runtime trying to accomplish. It places you inside a specific, irretrievable tenderness. It speaks in the past tense about something that existed in the present tense and never will again. It is not a song about death, exactly. It is a song about the particular texture of a life that has ended, the small, ordinary, unglamorous details of a person's existence that become unbearably precious the moment that person is no longer there to inhabit them. Elvis recorded it in 1970, 12 years after Gladys died. 12 years during which he had built an empire, made movies, served in the military, married, become a father, reinvented himself creatively, and filled virtually every available moment with a kind of noise and activity and relentless forward motion that grief, when it cannot be processed, tends to demand. And then he walked into a studio and recorded a song that dismantled 12 years of careful noise in under 3 minutes. The song was written by Johnny Christopher, and it arrived in Elvis's catalog through the standard machinery of the archival recording process, a songwriter pitching material, a producer reviewing it, a session being scheduled. Nothing about its arrival was ceremonial or significant on the surface. It was one of many songs being considered for a recording session that would eventually yield a body of work that critics and fans have spent decades parsing for meaning. But something happened when Elvis encountered this particular song that set it apart from everything else on the table. The people present in that studio during the recording have described an atmosphere that was, by every account, unlike almost any other Elvis session they had witnessed. And these were people who had witnessed many. They had seen Elvis record with joy and with frustration, with creative hunger and with professional exhaustion, with the focused intensity of an artist who knew exactly what he wanted and with the restless dissatisfaction of one who couldn't quite locate it. They had seen the full range of what a recording session could look like when Elvis Presley was at the center of it. What they had not seen, or had rarely seen, was what happened when he recorded Mama Like the Roses. The word that appears most consistently across their accounts is quiet. Not the quiet of disengagement or of a performer going through the motions. A different quality of quiet entirely. The quiet of someone doing something that costs them something real, in real time, with no ability to separate themselves from the cost. One account describes Elvis standing at the microphone with his eyes closed for the duration of the recording, not as an affectation, but in the way that people close their eyes when they need to be somewhere else, and somewhere else is precisely where the song is taking them. He sang it once. The take that exists on the recording is, by most accounts, the only complete take he needed. Which tells you something, because Elvis, for all his vocal gifts, was not typically a one-take artist in the emotional register this song required. He worked, he refined, he came back to things. But Mama Like the Roses he sang once, completely, from beginning to end, and then the session moved on. As though staying in that particular place any longer than absolutely necessary was something he had already decided he would not do. The song was released as a B-side in 1970, which is its own quiet irony. One of the most personally significant recordings of his entire career, pressed onto the back of a single and handed to the world without ceremony or context or any indication of what it had cost the man who made it. That is how Elvis managed the things that mattered most to him. He put them somewhere the world could technically access them, while ensuring that the world would never quite know what it was looking at. And then he never performed it live. Not once. Not in the 7 years between its recording and his death, during which he performed hundreds of shows and cycled through an enormous repertoire that shifted and evolved and expanded to meet the demands of his audience and the capabilities of his declining health. The song was suggested, more than once, by more than one person who understood its resonance and believed, reasonably, that an audience hearing Elvis sing those words in a live setting would experience something unforgettable. Every suggestion produced the same response: quiet, immovable, non-negotiable, no. There is exactly one documented account of Elvis singing any portion of Mama Like the Roses outside of a recording studio. 1. The details of the account are sparse because the person who witnessed it understood immediately that they were seeing something private, something that was not meant to be cataloged or reported or folded into the larger narrative of Elvis Presley's public life. What they have said, in the careful language of someone who took the weight of what they witnessed seriously, is this: Elvis sang one verse. He stopped. He stood completely still for a moment that the witness described as feeling much longer than it actually was. And then he walked out of the room without saying a word to anyone. He never explained it, not to the witness, not to anyone else who ever asked. But then, some things don't require explanation. Some things are simply true in a way that exists beneath language, beneath performance, beneath the entire apparatus of public life that Elvis Presley had inhabited since he was 20 years old. Some griefs don't close. They just get carried. And the ones that don't close are the ones you cannot sing. There is a version of this story that ends with the song and the silence and leaves it there. A curious footnote in the biography of a complicated man, interesting enough to mention at a dinner party, forgotten by the following morning. That version of the story is a waste of everything we have just walked through together, because the refusal is not a footnote. It is not a curiosity. It is, if you are willing to look at it directly and hold it still long enough to understand what it is actually showing you, one of the most revealing things we know about Elvis Presley. More revealing than the record sales, more revealing than the cultural impact, more revealing even than the documented deterioration of his final years that has been examined and re-examined with an intensity that sometimes says more about our appetite for tragedy than our genuine interest in truth. What the refusal tells us is this: underneath every performance, underneath the rhinestone jumpsuits and the karate moves and the curled lip and the voice that could fill an arena and make it feel intimate, there was a man who had never found a way to grieve. Not fully, not in the way that grief requires, which is to say completely, without performance, without an audience, without the protective distance that turning feeling into art inevitably creates. Elvis Presley was one of the most emotionally expressive performers in the history of popular music. His entire career was built on the premise that he could access something raw and authentic and true and deliver it to an audience in a way that made them feel it in their own bodies. That was the gift. That was what made people scream and weep and line up around the block and buy the records and come back again and again to watch him do it live. But the gift had a shadow. And the shadow was this: that the emotional authenticity that made Elvis extraordinary as a performer was, in his private life, almost entirely routed through the performance itself. Music gave his feelings a shape that made them survivable. It gave them a structure, a beginning and a middle and an end, a key and a tempo and a lyric that organized the otherwise unmanageable into something that could be expressed without being fully inhabited. He could sing about loneliness and love and loss and make every person in the room feel that he meant it completely. Because he did mean it, but the singing itself was also the container that kept those feelings from consuming him entirely. Mama Like the Roses destroyed the container. That is the only honest way to describe what that song did to him. It was too specific, too accurate, too perfectly constructed around the exact shape of the wound he had spent 20 years learning to live alongside without looking at directly. Every other song about grief or loss or the people we have loved and can no longer reach offered enough distance, enough metaphor, enough generality, enough artistic architecture to make the emotion expressible without being fully exposed. That song offered nothing of the kind. It was written in the language of his actual life. The Roses, the ordinary domestic tenderness of a woman who had loved her son in the most unglamorous and therefore most real way possible. It asked him to stand in front of thousands of people and sing the truth about the one thing he had never been able to fully face, with no container to hold it and nowhere to put it when it overflowed. He could not do it. Not because he was weak, precisely because he was human. And this is where the story asks something of us, not just as people interested in Elvis Presley, but as people who participate in the broader culture of celebrity and consumption, and the particular hunger we have always had for access to the interior lives of the famous. We demanded everything from Elvis. The world did, from the moment he became the world's property at 20 years old. It demanded his voice and his body and his time and his health and his privacy and eventually his life, and it received all of those things, and it still wanted more. The authenticity, the realness, the proof that behind the icon was an actual human being feeling actual human things. He gave us that too. More than most people in his position ever have, more than was reasonable to ask, more than he could ultimately sustain. He gave it in the recordings and the performances and the unguarded moments that cameras caught, and the gospel sessions that people who were present have described as something closer to worship than entertainment. He gave and gave and gave in the way that people give, when giving is the only mode of connection they fully trust. The one thing he kept, the one small, private, unglamorous, heartbroken corner of himself that he refused to place on a stage, was his grief for a woman from Tupelo, Mississippi, who had believed in him before belief was justified, and loved him before love was earned, and left him 23 years old and famous beyond imagination, and more alone than he had ever been in his life. That grief belonged to him. It was the one thing in his entire adult existence that was not for sale, not for performance, not for the consumption of an audience that had already taken so much. He sang everything the world asked him to sing. Every compromise, every piece of commercial filler, every song that asked nothing of him and received everything anyway. He sang through addiction and heartbreak and artistic frustration and the slow physical collapse of his final years. He sang because singing was how he lived, how he connected, how he made sense of a world that had stopped making ordinary sense the moment it decided he belonged to everyone. Everything except the one song that told the truth about who he actually was. Maybe that was the only boundary Elvis Presley ever successfully held. And maybe, knowing everything we know now, understanding the full weight of what it cost him to hold it, maybe we should let him keep it. Two of the greatest to ever do it, and the night they shared the same stage ended with only one of them walking away unchanged. If this story hit differently than you expected, drop a comment and tell me why. Subscribe if you want more stories that go where the mythology doesn't.